Well, I'm Dan McLaughlin, and this is another episode of Fair Folk at Work. We've had musicians, we've had actors, we've had dancers, but we've never had somebody from Friends of Faire. My guest today has been the longtime director of Friends of Faire. Her name is Linda Sutherland, and she's my guest today. Hello, Linda.
Hello, how are you?
I am doing very well. And yourself?
Quite well now that fair is finished for the season, catching up with myself again.
Well, let me jump right into it and ask the first Fair Folk at Work question, which is, who was the person who said to you there was a thing called fair, and what did they say to get you out there?
Well, first of all, as we remember in 1989, Fair had to move from Agoura, and Phyllis settled upon San Bernardino, Glen Helen Parkway, or as we call it here, Devore, because that's the little area that is called in San Bernardino. I happen to live in San Bernardino, and our local newspaper, the Sun newspaper, played it up big time. And my husband and my son decided they wanted to go to Fair. Now, we have to understand, we owned a costume store. We've owned two different costume stores. The last one we owned for 40 years. So we had costumes. That was no thing. He pulled something out of stock and he and my son took off to Fair. Well, they both fell in love with it, especially my husband. And he said he wanted to do this every week. And I had not gone with him. I was staying back taking care of our store. So he and my son carried on. They went the second weekend. The Queen had looked at him and acknowledged him, and he was just in love, my husband was. So I said, well, I'm going to have to go with him because we were married till his recent passing in November, 59 years, but we had always worked together. We were together 24/7. And so I said, okay, I'll go to Fair. He wanted to join with the Celts. So I went to Fair. I would get there for the opening and meet up with him. And it was enjoyable, but I was there because of him. And I did a lot of shopping, saw some different shows, but I would always leave about 3 o'clock. I think I would sometimes stay to see the Queen. That's how I first learned about Fair and joined Fair.
Can I ask you a couple of
Sure,
immediate questions that sprang into my mind?
sure.
Did your costume company specialize in theater or film?
We were a year-round costume store. So, and we were not really a rental store. We were strictly, except for Santas and Easter bunnies, we sold costumes. But we had Renaissance costumes in stock. Later on, I made our costumes because not so much today, but when we attended fair, the first thing you did is you wanted to fit in. So you looked at everything and you said, I have to get something. And for the ladies, I have to tell you, Heart's Delight. They're still with Fair, by the way. Every lady would go to Heart's Delight and we'd buy a dress because it looked the most like Renaissance Fair and it was a reasonable price because, as you know, nobles can be very costly. And my husband, his first costume, because we happened to have it in stock, was a Henry VIII costume, which really was not appropriate, but he was very happy with it. Of course, it was extremely hot too, but he didn't care. And he joined Clan McCullen and he discovered Friends of Faire, which was Fair is made up of guilds mainly, but there was a group called Friends of Faire, which Phyllis started back in the 70s. The earliest director I can find was Sue Honor, who's still with Fair. She was the director about 1980. She now is the director of St. Cuthbert's, among other things, and she's played many different parts. But anyway, it was under Living History, and Phyllis would appoint a director, but my husband joined them. They were mainly a social club. They did a lot of drinking. You look at early things of Friends of Faire, there was always an ale stand by them. Phyllis, these were for people who wanted to become, they actually donated a lot of money to Faire. They were, a lot of them were contributors. And you could buy a membership into Friends of Faire, and that made you a part of Faire to you. Really didn't do anything except other be a social club.
I'm sorry,
That's how.
can I interrupt for a second?
Go ahead.
I'm still fascinated by you and your husband working together in a costume store. What did you do and what did he do?
That's why we stayed married. We knew what our strengths and our weaknesses were. I'm the paper person. I love paper. I can follow through and do everything like that. My husband was a salesman and makeup. Was one of the top makeup artists, especially in disaster makeup. He would do large disasters. A few years back, they did a big disaster. Well, one day they crashed a plane at Norton Air Force Base. He made up all the victims. One where he had to do 500 people in an hour, made them up as victims. So he ran the store. He was hands-on. I worked with all the employees. I set all the schedules. I did all the paperwork. I worked the office. We did it very well, I think. And unfortunately, the only reason we had to finally close is my husband got quite ill. And
Can I ask you another thing?
yes.
Before the fair, what was your favorite costume?
I really wasn't a costume person. Isn't that funny? And I'll tell you, we got into costumes roundabout way. My husband was also, and we still are members of the Magic Castle. And we have one son, and Gary fell in love with magic at age 4. We were in a little tiny Western, it probably might have been Western costumes because we were in a little Western town owned by Vern Schaefer, who had owned Colton Piano in Oregon, Colton, called Movie Land Frontier Town. And we had to dress in Western clothing. It was like a little tiny Knott's Berry farm right on the 10 freeway. So we had started with a printing company. We owned a printing company. My husband had been a printer, and we had owned a printing company, which I worked in with too, but I did all the typesetting and things like paperwork and things. But Gary needed costumes as a magician. At age 4, by the time he was 6, he worked the summer with a circus. And Steve dressed up with a store, and he became a clown. Frontier Red, the cowboy clown, and my son was Feather, the clown, because he weighed so little. I guess we got into costume. We got into magic because magic is very expensive. So we decided we'd open a store because then we could buy it wholesale. And we started adding costumes. In fact, my first order, I can still remember, we went to the costume show, a wholesaler, and one of the salesmen that we used to buy things for the magic store from was there, and he held my hand all day. I finally spent $1,200, and I was beside myself. I don't know, Stephen, I don't think we can ever afford this. Well, I have to tell you, many years later, it was lots more than that $1,200. But anyway, that's how we first got into costumes. Found out
Can
they
I
sold.
ask what you did before costumes?
We ran our printing company. And before that, my husband and I have had over 450 foster, we call them children, but mainly they were young adults, teenagers and young adults. We go back to the late 60s. My husband actually took a job. He was a counselor. He worked with young people with drug and emotional problems. And I worked another job because he was only guaranteed $25 a month. One of the local social, like Kiwanis or something like that, paid. They actually got 2 checks a month for $12.50 each. So I worked an outside job. Steve, though, he could talk to kids. I mean, they listened to him. And my husband was a fascinating man. He had a group of kids. These were young Mexican kids who called themselves the North Side Surfers. I don't think one of those kids had ever been on a surfboard in their life, but that's what in the 60s, you had to be a surfer. And the newspaper caught up. We were in a little community center run by the Methodist Church. Anyway, Steve, among other things, he did. My husband actually, the kids started a program called Dopers Anonymous, because this is when kids were into psychedelic drugs, but these kids were mainly into marijuana. But that to them was heavy drugs. We got some other kids, and the kids decided to start their own little group, and they call themselves Dopers Anonymous because they could say, I'm from the DA. Their parents wanted to be involved, but of course, they didn't want their parents at the meeting. So we started a program called Dopers Anonymous Rehabilitation and Education, DARE. Does that sound familiar? Somebody in the local government asked Steve to write a program. So my husband wrote a program, and they changed it to Drug Abuse Rehabilitation Education. And federal government actually funded the program for $1 million. Now, the funny thing is, my husband was not allowed to run his own program because he did not have a 4-year degree. He had gone to college and everything, so he couldn't run his own program. He was also very well known for working with kids on the street. And remember, back in the late 60s, a lot of these kids were on the street, not living on the street per se, but they were street kids. In fact, I have to tell you, I came across 3 days ago a pair of my husband's velvet bell bottoms, the brown ones, velvet bell bottoms. My daughter-in-law looked at those and she says, "Are these real?" I said, "Oh, yes, they are." But anyway, so Steve decided he'd go back to school because they said he couldn't run his own program. So he went to Valley College and was taking a class. Of course, it was going to be taught on working with street kids. So the professor gets up and he brings up this little pamphlet, this little booklet. Oh, it's probably maybe 20 pages. And he said, "This is the only book that is known, and it will tell you how to work with kids on the street, these street kids, these hippies." He says, "And this is going to be the textbook." So after the class, my husband went up and said, "Do you see the name on there?" He says, "Yes." He says, "That's me. I'm Steve Sutherland." At that point, the professor said, the next class, he said, "I want to tell you all something." He says, He said, "This is the man who wrote the book." And my husband, now you have to understand, he was only in his, by then we were probably in our late 20s. He said he's going to teach the class, which Steve did the rest of the semester. But that's how we started. Then we got into costumes, into Frontier Town. We've done a lot of many unusual things. So Renaissance would not be unusual for us to have gotten involved in.
Can I
But
ask a little more fair related question?
absolutely.
When you talk to Phyllis about Friends of Faire,
Hmm.
to use modern speak, what was the mission statement of Friends of Faire?
At that point, because I was not director at that point, I was just a member. But Friends of Faire was an organization started by Living History Center as for the donors, for people who wanted to donate, and that money then would be used for education, as far as Phyllis was concerned. And they had levels of membership. So that was your contribution. It went anywhere from, I think it was around $20 a year to up to $1,000 a year. There were $1,000 contributors. For Phyllis, it was a venue for her contributors to feel just a little bit more part of Faire.
What was the sense you got of Phyllis's educational philosophy?
Yes. Well, remember, by the time Phyllis got the Faire to Devore, there was a lot of money issues involved. But at that point, Phyllis would come in and talk to Friends of Faire, and she was trying to get them more involved. Her main concern was that members of Friends of Faire, that we were contributing to the fair, our membership, but mainly that was what we were just there to be, not to be really participants, and not what we later evolved into. But Phyllis, I think, got very exasperated sometimes with Friends of Faire because we were into mischief all the time. We were young, full of vim and vigor. So we were constantly dreaming up things because we didn't have to worry about costume approval. We didn't have to worry about following anybody's rules. And Phyllis, to her credit, she decided she really wanted to get Friends of Faire, but we could get a little more involved. So she asked him one day at a meeting, she says, "Can somebody give me some ideas of things that Friends of Faire can do in the fair?" And my husband came up. A parade of flowers that Friends of Faire would step off from Friends of Faire, parade through the whole fair, and then meet the Queen at the Maypole, which is where we always met her. And throughout the fair, we would give people flowers and invite them to come to greet the Queen. That parade still continued to my husband 2 years ago when he no longer could do it. But that was our first real involvement with Faire, as Friends of Faire. Other than that, we were in our little garden. She always gave us a spot. We had a lot of fun. And depending on your level, if you were in the higher levels, then once a year, Phyllis gave them a luncheon, and we called them the haves and the have-nots. She would put a rope up in the garden, and the haves would go over and have lunch, and the have-nots, if we didn't pay enough for our membership, we would stand over and watch them eat. But it was just what it was.
Do you enjoy talking to patrons as you were parading around?
Oh, ooh. My husband led the parade. He did. I just carried my flowers. I would give flowers, yeah. Yeah, he led that parade. He loved that parade. I would be up there when I was his wife, but other than that, yes. And I didn't mind giving people flowers and inviting them because that was all real quick.
Do
Yeah,
you
it was
remember what his spiel was? What was he? Did he have sort of a go-to, hear ye, come see the Queen or something?
probably he would announce that we were going to visit the Queen and that they might join our parade. We would actually have them join our parade. And most of the parades at Fair are not where we invite the people to join because they're very structured, even though they don't look very structured. They are very structured. We would give them flowers, join in with us, and we are going to greet the Queen, and we would march on to the Maypole. That's when Devore was around the two lakes. That's when we first started the parade.
Did
Uh,
you give flowers to the Queen, or could they keep them as a treasured
They kept those
souvenir?
flowers, but my husband would always have a bouquet and he would present those flowers to the Queen. And then she could then decide what to do with them. Because there really wasn't money to buy flowers. I think Phyllis just assumed they would show. So my husband went to the local floral wholesaler and made a deal with him that he would give us his leftover flowers on Friday. We would go pick them up, which we did. For years, our van would be full of these flowers that were just their end of their life, but we gave them new life. And ladies and Friends of Faire, that we'd have a gardening group, and they would take them and make them into bouquets and cut them off and revive them and off, but they didn't cost anybody any money. My husband was very good at things like this. Then it was decided that a few years later, well, let me go back. The guilds used to go out and meet people out front, meet and greet, we called it out front. But the guilds really said they didn't have time to do a lot of that. So yeah, well, Friends of Faire, they've got nothing to do. We'll invite them to see if some of them want to participate. And so the first thing they gave us was meet and greet, and you could earn a participant pass doing meet and greet. Well, that can save you a lot of money on Faire because at that point you didn't have season long passes, you had individual tickets. So we had a little group, we did meet and greet. We would go out, and that's when they used to have ribbons that we pinned on. They were actually paper, we called them ribbons. And we would ask, what did they want to be that day? Did they want to be a noble person? Did they want to be a peasant? Did they want to be middle class or a Puritan? Those were black.
I
And
remember those from the other side
yes,
because
we
I did
pinned
the
them
show.
on. Yes, we would pin them on you. We had boxes of straight pins, and that's how we would meet and greet people as they waited at the front to come into Faire. People loved it. There would be sometimes great discussions of, well, what am I really? And then we'd have to explain to them what each class was, and they would go throughout Faire wearing their ribbons so the real participants could greet them knowing what their class was. Even that was their costume. That was their clothing for.
Did you
And,
find that little girls like to be princesses?
oh, of course. Of course. They want to be. If they can't be the queen, they want to be. Even to this day, when we have some very unusual costumes at Faire now, I think sometimes Faire, I think we could sometimes put spaceships in our Renaissance, and they say, those people must have been thinking about spaceships at that time because they're not so concerned with wanting to fit in like we were. It's a dress up time, and they come dressed the way they want to dress, and they have a great time, a wonderful time. And it's us that needs to change in some ways to look at them and say, invite we to, and we do, we invite them in. And but it's just at a different, now it's time traveling. See, we didn't have time travelers. We didn't think about those. We went backwards. We never went forwards.
Well, I
Uh,
think the idea of giving ribbons was really, really good.
yes, I always loved them. Just so brought the public into the Faire. And Phyllis was very good at including people. I've noticed now the Faire this is getting back to that in a different way. I felt very inclusive, even with all these very unusual costumes the last 2 years. But I feel like REP is, in some ways, they're reaching out in a different way. But I love those ribbons. I wish we had those ribbons back. They were just so much fun.
I've heard from other people that, Phil started in the 60s she was a teacher, but she was also very influenced by the avant-garde theater at the time. And that was everybody's in the show and you cannot fail. Phyllis ever tell you that?
Phyllis was very quiet, especially as she got, as things started changing some. My favorite Phyllis story is one night, it was about 7 o'clock. She had already sold the Faire, but she came to the Faire one night. But she always, when she would come, she'd come very late. It was about 7 o'clock at night, and she was kind of wandering around. And I said to her, I said, Phyllis, what do you think of the changes? Because things had changed, of course. There was a new company involved. And Phyllis said two things. She says, I don't remember the food court, all the building, in fact, most of the buildings were always browns, some shade of brown, brown and a cream color. And the color would come into to flags and things that you put upon them. But the basic booths were always this brown and a cream color. And so she said, well, they're changing those colors. But she said, more importantly, she says, I miss the pebbles. She had pebbles everywhere, rocks, those little tiny rocks. All her paths had those on rocks on them. And I have to tell you, when we would parade, I don't care how you paraded, how tight your shoes were, how high your shoes were, your boots were. One of those things would get in your shoe and it would never lay flat. It would always come up on the point. We cursed those things all the time. And here, that's what she missed the most. That was, to her, was those rocked pathways. And
Well,
I
for
think that was
many
one.
people, of course, it was the heat and eating the pickles.
Oh yes,
And
pickles. Oh yes, pickle sandwiches. Yeah, one of the things at Friends of Faire was we always had water. We would have a lemonade or something like that, and pickles. Always pickles. And you would say to somebody, if they got really overheated, you'd say, "Drink some pickle juice." Oh, that's awful. And then pretty and they go, "This is really good." Then you knew they needed that pickle juice. But we would make pickle sandwiches. Have you ever made a pickle sandwich?
I never have.
Okay, a pickle sandwich, because we also put pretzels in Friends of Faire. In fact, I'd have to hide them from some people because that was their whole meal for a whole day. Take a pickle slice, dill pickles,
Hmm.
and put it between two pretzels, little round pretzels, and that was your pickle sandwich. So you got your salt, you got your electrolytes, everything. It kept many a person with the heat. And Devore was a interesting. I get Agura was more toward the ocean, even though it was very, very hot. Devore, it was called the Devore-tex. Devore had the strangest weather at times. It would start off very, very cold in the mornings, and then we would get some sun out, and then sometimes the fogs would come in. But you never knew. It didn't matter what the weatherman said about Devore because of where it's situated in San Bernardino County. But it would change weather. So we always made sure we all had pickles and things like that. And to this day, we are still pickles and water because people are, oh, I got to drink ales. And our saying to them about ales are, for every ale, you better drink 2 glasses of water because the ale is not going to save you. If those pickles are that pickle juice, oh my goodness. Anyway, that was kind of what Friends of Faire was that as it evolved into it. Wanted to get involved with Faire, but weren't sure they were ready for that all day commitment because at that point, if you belonged to a guild, you started in at 8 o'clock in the morning and you did not finish till probably an hour or so afterwards, and you worked. You didn't have, oh, well, I'll be there this weekend or I'll be there one day this. It was a commitment.
Well, the weird thing about the fair and what Phyllis set up was that she created an organization that people would work willingly for in pretty awful conditions,
Yes.
voluntarily, without getting paid much of anything.
Yes. When my husband first started with, they used to get a food voucher.
Yes, food tickets.
Yes, yes. And I don't think were they $5 if that much. I don't recall. My husband got them because of working with the Celts and with the parade, but I never got one.
Oh, I'd forgotten that. Yes, you could accumulate. The more stuff you did, the more they paid you in food tickets.
Exactly. And so, and it has passed. In fact, I just came across this morning Steve's 1992 participant pass. Yeah, I was just looking at that, and it says Living History Center on it. Didn't even say Renaissance Pleasure Fair. It's a Living History Center. It's my understanding that actually there were two parts Renaissance Pleasure Fair. There was the profit making part and then the nonprofit. And the Living History was always a nonprofit center. And that itself caused, I think, some problems within because you really can't have a nonprofit in the middle of a profit. For many, many years, people said, well, I'm a member of Friends of Faire. That's nonprofit. Well, it really wasn't because it had no nonprofit status other than the fact that Phyllis had said, well, the money goes to Living History Center. I think it probably went to Faire itself. But I have to tell you this. We had people who every year they would mail in their membership for the year who never knew that we actually existed. They would sometimes
Really?
come to the fair and go, this really exists. Well, yes, it does. Well, I was just making a donation because we, at the beginning, they had little medallions. Every year you get a medallion. Later on, it revolved into, we had a set pattern and they made chains of offices with it. But we started off with, after REP bought it, we started off what we call the picture pins. And they were, about 3 inches. And we did 6 of them and various people within the Renaissance. And our last one was Queen Elizabeth. But we did Drake and actually did one for Walsingham.
Did you do Walter
Shakespeare,
Raleigh or Shakespeare?
Raleigh, Shakespeare. There's 6 of them. I don't remember all 6 of them. And people wanted those pens because they're beautiful pens. Since about 96, all of our pens have always been made by Fellowship Foundry, Kevin O'Hare. He designs them and he's designing me a new one now for our new Friends of Faire. We're called now Forever Friends of Faire, even though we're not involved with the fair.
Can I
But
ask you something, shifting
ask
gears a
away.
little bit?
Sure.
From the outside looking in, the main way I could always tell the difference between a court noble and a Friend of Faire noble was that your costumes were much heavier and elaborate. So can you talk to me a little bit about the Friend of
Costuming.
Faire costume philosophy?
Yes, anybody could join Friends of Faire. But if you wanted to participate, a volunteer, we had certain areas that we volunteered in. We did meet and greet. For a few years, we did questionnaires. They had us doing questionnaires within the fair. You could do Lord Sutherland's parade. It became a very specialized parade where you went directly to the Queen. They didn't give out flowers, but they met the Queen at court, then would precede her coming back before her parade stepped off.
I'm sorry, I seem to have lost the thread. What was Friends of Faire's relationship to the costume department? Because it seemed that some of your colors only were unique to the Friends of Faire.
If you were a participant, and within that group of, as I said, there were certain groups where we were out in the public. Okay.
Mhm.
Uh, we also had people who volunteered on our gardening committee. They did not have to have approved costumes. If you worked our buttery, we had our own little, what we called the own ale stand, but we didn't sell any liquor in there. We sold sodas and things. And that's where we kept our cool water and our pickles and things. They did those. You did not have to have an approved costume. But if you worked the Friends of Fair gate or the front gate doing meet and greet or with Lord Sutherland, the Queen, if you were out in the public, we had to go through costume approval. If you were a Friends of Fair, you could wear anything or not. Or, well, we didn't want you nude, but you could come in just regular street clothes. And I have members who never had a costume, that always just were in street clothes. But other than that, they could make their own costumes be whatever they, as bright as they wanted to be, because they did not earn a participant pass. They did not have a pass. But if you earned a pass, you had to go attend classes, and that was anybody volunteered with Friends of Fair. And you had to, if you were out in the public, if you interacted with the public, you had to go through costume approval, which meant Frida, which I miss Frida so much. I loved her. She scared the daylights out of every one of us. You would just quake in your shoes if you thought the day you knew you had to go to costume approval for Frida, because I can remember people showing up. I forgot my hat, Frida. She'd say, no costume approval. You come back with your hat, and you'd have to stand that long line again. She'd know if you borrowed somebody's hat. She wouldn't know for some reason. Or you forgot your shoes and you borrowed somebody's shoes. Oh, Frida, I don't care. But you know what? If you were getting through approval with Renaissance Pleasure Fair through Frida, you could go to any Renaissance fair, and to this day you still can if you keep to those standards. You can go to any fair and know that you are absolutely correct. Phyllis started that with her costuming. She wanted that feeling that was all encompassing. And with costuming, with Friends of Fair, we were the same way. If we were going to participate and volunteer to earn a pass, because what we earned is we didn't get paid. We earned a season's pass, which meant we could come in early and stay an hour later. And when we got to Irwindale, you could earn a parking pass too. Yes, but
Talk
we
to
made
me about your costume.
I made most every costume I made. Oh, one year, Ricky Kipple, who was one of the new owners of the fair, gave me one of her beautiful costumes, and it was black. In the early days, all the nobles always wore black.
Yes.
This year we had nobles in yellow and what I'd say was red and oranges. And so I wore it was a Spanish surcoat. Ricky gave me that costume. I wore it for many years. And Linda McFeeder and Buffy then became part owners of the fair. And about 10 years ago now, Linda came to me and said, we want to have a costume made for you. It would be the first costume I ever had that I did not make myself, but I happen to be a seamstress. I've been sewing since I was 5 years old. My dress, it's orange. You go, orange? But it's orange and a mustard color yellow and brown, and it's gorgeous. It is beautiful, and it has glass beads on it, and it's a full costume. I fit right into court. It's an approved costume. Steve was the same thing. He was nobles. We were nobles. In fact, we were both knighted by the Queen at Devore, an honor for people at Friends of Fair who did things for the fair. You could be knighted. So I'm actually Dame Lady Linda Sutherland. And to this day, there are people who never call me anything but Lady Linda. I can be out anywhere and not know this and person say Lady Sutherland. I know immediately that's fair. They know me and I know them.
How
I'm
does that make you feel to be recognized outside of fair as Lady
Well, it's always
Sutherland?
odd to me. And it's not funny, but it is odd to me, but it makes me feel very honored and very welcomed and very loved. Fair family is the most amazing group of people. With my husband dying last November, Steve was sick the last 2 years. Last year, I took him to fair, and it was a very difficult. By 1:30, I'd say, "Okay, Stephen, we're going to go over and watch the Queen," and then we're going home. Oh, I don't need to go home. I don't. He was in a chair. He couldn't stand. He couldn't walk or anything, but he wanted to go to fair, and I'm so thankful and so glad I did. Took him. I had somebody that came with me to help me every day. But we would get him to the car. Stephen, we're going home now. I don't need, I'm fine. I'm fine. By the time we would get him to the car, he would be, before I even started the car, we'd get him in the car, situated with his chair, and he'd be sound asleep. So he needed to go home. But that last year, he said to me, Linda, people love me. They would go out of their way to stop. The Queen would stop on her progress and stop to talk to him. Tinker, Tinker is our the no man who he's the resident. He comes to the village to sell, and he carries a 40-pound basket on his back, wicker basket. There's a little pouch in that basket of my husband. Steve went to fair this year. The funny thing is that Steve, one day I said to Tinker something about it. He says, he said, Lord Sutherland's been all over the fair. But of course, being Lord Sutherland, he slept all the time. And anybody that knew Steve, that we had a bed in Friends of Faire. Steve actually made the bed originally when he was in the Celts, and it was a rope bed and everything. And we used to keep it along the fence line of Friends of Faire. Every Friends of Faire we had. Well, it started in Devore because at Glen Helen because Steve had gotten sick, and but he would sleep on this bed. My husband had had narcolepsy all his life from a child on up. So Steve could literally be talking to you and go sound asleep. So we would put him on his bed, and he looked quite noble. And in fact, if you get onto my Facebook page, you will see a picture of Lord Sutherland there, stretched out on his bed. In fact, people would throw stones at him because you could talk around him. If he was asleep, he was asleep. But he looked magnificent, laying upon this bed in his nobles. And one of the construction crew, she made these huge, beautiful pillows and quilts, and he had a feather mattress on it. Oh, it was quite the thing. And it was always along the fence line. And he would be there sleeping, and people would move his foot, see if they could wake him up. Other people would stand there and go, is he real? Is that a prop? Other people would throw little pebbles at him. A few ladies, including Rick Kipple, jumped over the fence into bed with him. And we'd have to wake up Sutherland, Lord Sutherland, it's time to go greet the Queen. So we'd have to get him up and get his hat on him and get him off to march to greet the Queen. But yes, Steve was known to this day. Where's Lord Sutherland? He's asleep somewhere, but he loved it. He loved fair. And family we developed, oh my goodness, they have supported me so much, have been so kind to me and so encouraging. Even my own family is just amazed. My son, we called him Lord Sutherland the Lesser because, of course, he was the son, and now he's not. And his daughter, he has a daughter who is a very special child. Sophia Rose is one of about 50 people in the world who has this vitamin A mutation that she has. She's completely confined, has been all her life to a wheelchair. She can't stand, sit, or anything. We were told she'd never talk. Well, at 7, all of a sudden, she started talking. She went totally blind at 9. She'd been going to fair. They would bring her every year. So everybody knew Sophia. She decided she wanted to be in court. She auditioned for, and now you have to understand, a little girl who has to have somebody push her wheelchair, who was totally blind. She passed the audition, and she is now Lady Margaret. Now, this year she couldn't do fair very much because she's a junior in high school. In fact, in 2 days, she'll be a senior. But she loves fair as much as her grandpa. When it was time every year to put the fair away, and she's, Grandma, what's coming up this weekend? I said, what's coming up weekend? You have to tear the fair down, turn the fair. She says, you're tearing the fair down. And she literally cries, tears. It breaks her heart to think the fair. Well, Sophia, where's the fair going? It's going to the tree farm, Grandma. But it'll be back next year, Sophia. I know. But her little heart breaks every time we have to tear a fair down. So I was with her yesterday. We did Mother's Day yesterday. And she was saying, Grandma, what time did they finish tearing the fair down this year? I said, well, they finished, I'm told, about 4 o'clock on Saturday. Okay. Grandma, will they take it to the tree farm? Yes, Sophia, it'll be at the tree farm. But she's as involved in fair as her grandpa was. She loves it. And everybody in fair knows Sophia Rose. Lady Margaret, excuse me. Lady Margaret Gordon, who's based upon, by the way, a real family member.
Can
And
I can I
yeah, it was
interrupt for a
fun.
sec?
Absolutely. We need to get back to Friends of Fair, don't we?
No, not at all. You
Okay.
said you have been sewing since you were 5.
5 years old, yes.
That was a lesson from mom.
Yes. My mother was a single mom of 3 daughters and did not believe in welfare. I was raised in housing projects in Los Angeles. My mother, we were told to do our best we could if we did our best. And one time I was failing algebra, and I wasn't failing, I was getting a D in algebra. And I was in fear of having to tell my mother because my mother worked. Actually, she gave up her bedroom. From my youngest sister was 6.5 months old when my father left, and they had met in World War II. My mother was a corporal in the army, so I was born in 45. But my mother worked all of our lives. I can remember her giving up her bed so we'd have a live-in babysitter. And my mother never drove, took public transportation all of our life. But my mother raised three very independent daughters. We say we're tenacious. So other people would say we're probably stubborn, but that's okay.
I'm
I
sorry,
was
what
getting
does she do? What
algebra.
did she work at?
My mother worked for the military. She was a purchasing agent for many years for the federal government. She worked downtown Los Angeles. We lived in San Pedro. She would take the red car. She would get us up at 4 in the morning as we got a little older and walked us to the babysitter. Then she would take the bus to San Pedro, get on the red car, take the red car to downtown LA. And my mother would not get home till 7 o'clock at night, but she would always cook for us. Later years, my sister and I realized my mother, there probably wasn't enough food for my mother. So my mother, she wasn't hungry, but my mother really gave us a work ethic that was just unbelievable. She did not believe in welfare. We were her daughters. She would tell us, I'm responsible for you, and nobody needs to tell me how to raise my daughters. And my mother raised us to be independent, to do our very best. And if we did our best, because I said I was failing algebra, and my mother said, did you do your best? I was only two subjects I ever had trouble with. One was algebra and one was shorthand. And my mother said to me, Linda, I didn't like either one of those either. But she said, did you do your best? Yes, Mom. I really, she says, enough. Okay. Okay. If you did your best and you know you did your best, that was my mother. She lived to in her 80s alone.
Did you
She
ever
was
take her out to fair?
no, she never wanted to go. My mother was not a person who joined into things and did things like that. She just was a very, I think because, she had worked all her life. She loved to sew though. And she made dolls. My mother made rag dolls and she made these rag dolls and she called them Cuties by Cora. My mother's first name was Cora, Cora. And we would give them to people. She would love to give people a doll. She would sell them too. But if you were somebody special, my mother, you could ask my mom for a doll and she would give you a doll. So those are very special dolls that she made.
So back to you and sewing.
I was 5 years old and I wanted to sew. And of course, we sewed with a needle and thread. We didn't even own a sewing machine. My mother couldn't afford one. As I said, we were living in housing projects and she raised us. We lived on her salary, which was at that point not very much. First sewing machine she ever got was a Singer featherweight. And it's still in our family. My niece has it now. They weigh 9 pounds, but my mother always make us doll clothes. And when I got to junior high, we were on half day sessions. I went to school in Los Angeles, LA City schools. And there were too many of us because remember we were all the war babies. So for 2 years in junior high, they gave me 2 years of sewing. So I learned to make everything. To this day, I still have my apron that I made. Then when I got to high school, they gave me a cooking class. And in the cooking class, we were supposed to do a project. And I said, well, can I sew something? My mother needs drapes for the house. So I made drape and I made I made my own wedding gown. I made all the bridesmaids, my mother's outfit, my mother-in-law's. I made everybody's things. I sewed them all because I love sewing. So costuming for Renaissance was easy for me. I enjoyed doing that. I made Steve's for years. I made all of his things. Rarely would we get something that was already done by somebody else. But even if we did, I would alter it or add to it or things like that. So good Renaissance clothing is very comfortable to wear. If it's not comfortable to wear, then it's probably not done right. When I'm wearing my Nobles, people will say to me, oh, isn't that hot? Because they weigh sometimes around 40 pounds. But the way they're constructed, they're not bad. In Renaissance, if you're a noble, we can take our sleeves off. The ladies have those big hoops. You can stand there and swing back and forth with those hoops a little bit. You wonder why they're moving. It's because they're moving air under those hoops. And we wear crazy pantaloons underneath our noble skirts. They're kind of crazy materials underneath sometimes. That's our little way to be different. I played football in Friends of Faire in my nobles. We used to have a big trebuchet, throw buckets of water upon the crowd. We'd invite them to gather around because it would be hot. And we would spray. I'd be out there in the middle of it, getting wet too, because you make good nobles are made out of cotton and they'll dry because you don't want that shiny stuff. And I would put the sprinklers on in Friends of Faire Garden and run through the sprinklers with the kids, cool off about 10 degrees. So
And you become your own personal air conditioner.
absolutely. Now we have a gentleman, Robert, who makes rough. The rough actually has that little stuff in the center of it. When you get it wet, it cools off. They make bandanas out of it. Amazing things. They're called cool roughs. He makes them for Faire. Good costuming will work well. It's when you get into the synthetic materials and big fur things and like that, it gets hot. But no, we know how to cool off in Faire.
Can I
But I
ask a different thread of questions?
sure.
Have you been to a lot of other fairs over the years?
Yes, I've attended them, but I don't go to most of them. In fact, next Saturday I'm going to Coronaburg. I will visit them one time because I know so many people.
Well, not
Thing.
to name names or anything, but as you walk up to a fair you've never been before, what do you look at as, oh, this is a good fair? Or do you look at and say, uh-oh, they're not doing this right?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, we have Phyllis's standards that we judge everything against and REP standards. There's something to say about burlap walls. There's something to say about when you enclose everything, you shut the outside away. There are fairs who just put up almost a chain link fence. You see old tires, you see cars, the booths, you see, oh, they've been to Costco and bought a pop up. Are they costuming this? There's a difference between participants and patrons. And yes, there is. But the participants, to me, need a standard, and most of those don't meet up to the standard. Now, I have visited both. REP owns two other fairs. They own one in Bristol. It's called the Bristol Fair. It's in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The other one is the New York Renaissance Fair, and it's in Tuxedo. They also have the same standards that we have. They are very orientated toward costuming and things like that. They, again, are the all encompassing, and they both happen to be permanent sites. Yeah, when I go to other fairs, that's the first thing I notice is the atmosphere. And recently, our Clayton Hamburg, who has been our entertainment director this last year, says, "You are the paradingest most fair I know of." And Phyllis loved parades. You think of a Renaissance Pleasure Fair, and you know there's a parade somewhere. There's a parade
Yes.
to open. There's a parade to close. There was a Lord Mayor's parade. There was the Dance Macabre. We still have them. People say, "Oh, those are the people of the dead." And they really are more about living. Of course, the Queen's Progress, which is always quite grand, where you carry her in the litter. We still do Fair Brat Day and Fair Brats, which is one of the traditions that I work with. These are children. They were brought to fair very young, before they were 18. And most of those children didn't have any choice. Their parents do fair. So there they are, drug every week from classes on forward. So we have Fair Brat Day. And the oldest Fair Brat we have is the Chief and Sue Honor, probably, that are still involved in fair. And the children this year, we paraded to the maypole, and then they are let go to go throughout the fair, and they have their little banners and different booths and guilds, and they get a treat. Sometimes they get a piece of candy, some they get bubbles, they go to Fellowship Foundry Kevin, they can get a pewter fair brat pin, which is very prized. Little squeaking toys. They come up the whole bag. It's our version of Renaissance trick or treat for our children, and they look forward to it. Oh, let me tell you, this year we got on a thing about, and all these people, I'm a fair brat. They were posting on Facebook about I'm a fair brat, and I'm so proud of it. And I had this one young lady said, I didn't start till I was 19. She says, I'm not a fair brat. You have said I spied. I said, you can be an honorary fair brat. She got so excited. But yeah, the Celts is here. We had 4 generations of Celts that were fair brats this year.
Can I ask another,
Absolutely.
more specifically, our fair question?
Mm-hmm.
As you've walked around, what booth architecture do you remember with fondness?
I think a lot of them in the food court because they are the original buildings. I mean, we still sell turkey legs. They still sell toad in the holes. A lot of those are original booths, or they've been replaced and they go back to the original. I was telling you about Robert's booth. He built one that is just amazing. It's a cart, Fellowship Foundry, Kevin's little tiny booth. There are a lot of fair that's still left that is very reminiscent of when I first started fair. And some of the newer ones, they want to come in, they want to do a pop-up, but they're not pop-ups. They are still held to high standards. But it's the noise in the streets. That's what I remember about fair. We lost that for a few years, but that's back a lot more now. A lot more, with people singing and dancing and talking to the patrons. And that to me is fair. That noise, that cacophony of sounds, and all of a sudden a parade is coming through and you got to step aside. And then they have the Queen now actually walk in the morning, and she parades to court, and then she has lunch at court out in the open. She and the yeoman of the guard, and they have a whole, for probably an hour and a half at least, and they have ale jam now. People join ale jam, and they get so excited, and they do 4 times a day now. They visit various ale stands, and they make noises. They're their own little parade. There's always, that excitement that going on.
Right. Let me ask the same question. What changed the noun from booth to craft? What for you are the quintessential fair crafts that you've experienced?
Oh, I have for many, many years, from 96 until 2 years ago, I basically never left the Friends of Fair garden because we had so many members that I needed to make sure people were where they were supposed to be volunteering. My membership committee, we were called the Pimpaettes. Ricky Kipple one day said to us, Linda, you are like a pimp. I mean, I literally sold memberships on the last day of fair after fair was closed, but I needed to be in the garden. So for many, 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 many years, well, almost 30 years, I did not get out of that garden. I would go in there in the morning, I would go to the cast meeting and then back to the garden. And that was it till the end of the night when sweeps go through and then I could leave. But I loved it. Everybody knew where to find me, and that fair to me. But everybody came to me, parades, everything. I saw everything. When I first started fair, I wasn't involved in Friends of Fair those first couple of years. As I said, my husband was, and I would come and I would visit every booth. I still have some of those things, but I think the glass blowers, they amaze me. I love the glass booths. I'm not a big jewelry person, even though Heidi was amazing with her things. Patrick Morgan did many, many, many drawings of fair, and I love his work. I love to visit Patrick and see what he's got new. And then I love Gary and Molly. Is it Molly Morgan? They are amazing.
Just to interrupt, when Linda was reviewing this tape, she mentioned Molly when she met her sister Bonnie. So she just wanted everyone to know she was talking about Bonnie Morgan, not her equally delightful sister Molly. And now back to the interview, already in progress.
This year is my first year. I actually did the Fool's Parade.
Hmm,
Never done the
congratulations.
Fool's Parade. They gave me a nose, and there I am in the parade. Now I have trouble. I broke my hip about 4 years ago. When they put it back together, it changed the way I can walk. No pain with it, but I really can't walk very much. So I have a scooter I use. But there I am in the middle of the Fool's Parade. First Fool's Parade. I've always seen them.
Mhm.
Never participated. There I am in the Fool's Parade this year. It was fun. I'm up my nobles on my scooter, and Linda, your skirts are dragging. And we push my skirts up again. I mean, but or Lady Linda, we need help. We need help, Linda, Lady Linda. We got to fix your skirts. I really don't truly have a home per se. I could have joined any guild I wanted. I was invited. Friends of Fair, we were always independent in an odd sort of way. For the years, as it was bought out and we became more and more volunteers, we became the farm team. If you would go to the guilds now, you would and check with people. Many, many, many of them started out Friends of Fair. When we first came to the war, that was not true. They would hold auditions and they would get guild members. But through the years, if you started Friends of Fair and you volunteered and you liked it, a lot of them still stayed Friends of Fair members, but they were guild members also. So we became the farm team. And I think where this is going to be the saddest, I think in about 5 years from now, we're going to really find out that it's going to be harder for guild members to find more guild members because it's a commitment. And some people have to kind of work into that commitment. And Friends of Fair allowed you to work into that commitment. For others, they can go right into a guild.
Tell me about the recent friction between Fair and Friends of Fair from the Fair's perspective.
Right after REP decided that we would have a presence at Fair, one of my members, we had a Facebook page that she controlled and she named it Former Friends of Fair. For a whole year, that bothered me. I kept saying, we're not former, we still are Friends of Fair. We're still family. And all of a sudden, about 4 weeks ago, I said, we're not former, we're forever. And everybody loves the name. So now we're now forever Friends of Fair. And we're having a special medallion made for us. So many of us are so close, even though they do fair, but I have no home. I say I'm homeless now, but I'm anywhere and everywhere throughout fair. So people have a hard time finding me. But as I said, working on traditions. I worked on this year on Masterpiece. Masterpiece goes back to Phyllis's, where various craftspeople, we hold it now Marketplace Weekend. They bring enter something in Masterpiece. The public and the participants come and vote. And then they are awarded a medal from the Queen and a certificate. This year, after 3 years, we went back to knightings. This year, we knighted 2 people from guilds, 2 people that work with REP, security, well, event services, they call it, working with the entertainment department. And the other one was a vendor. And I'd never tell anybody they're getting knighted. I just come up with this ruse somehow to get them to court on the day we're going to knight people. And they are knighted. And that is quite, having had gone through it, it's, you say, oh, I'm going to be knighted. But when it starts and the Queen has you kneel and she takes that big sword and she starts going between your shoulders and with her intonement about it and God and country and and then they rise you up and they put as she puts your medallion on your medal on you, which we use, by the way, the picture of Queen Elizabeth's Armada portrait, purple ribbon. That's the only way you can wear purple if you're not the Queen. You wear that purple ribbon, and people will stop and say, "What is that?" And you explain to them, "I've been knighted." Then you can be. So this year we got to do knightings again, and I've already had people literally, Linda, I'm so and so. Can they be knighted? I say, you remind me next year, and I will put them on the list. I will investigate it, and then REP will make the decision of who will be knighted. That's an honor. Years ago, when Phyllis owned the fair, when you got knighted, that was here's your gold watch, there's the door. That was the nice way to say you're through. And people would, I don't want to be knighted. Don't tell me I'm being knighted. That means I'm gone. And yet Will Wood was knighted, I think, 5 times. He was knighted so many times that Phyllis actually had my husband have a gold, went to Kevin and had a gold knighting medallion made because he had all these others. And and I make up the certificates and you have and it's on real parchment, by the way, real vegetable parchment, and the Queen signs them and puts her seal upon them. And people are quite proud to have that seal, but the medallions, and they'll
Do
take them off the
you
wrist.
do the calligraphy of their names still?
I do it on the computer, but it looks good. I think it was Gerald Cepeda wrote it up for me. I have the announcements and we still use the same one. So that's one of the things I do because
You've
when
been
you get knighted,
talking
it's a
about
real big deal.
something and I haven't been able to figure out what it is. What is a memorial wall
Plaque.
plaque?
Okay. One year, we were still in Glen Helen, Devore. Fair used to go through Memorial Day weekend. In fact, Phyllis used to go the weekend afterward, which I always thought to me was odd because most people were on their vacation the weekend on Memorial Weekend, but she always went the weekend after. And if it rained, she would add weeks. One year, I remember we went to Father's Day. We thought fair was never going to end. But anyway, we decided we wanted to have a memorial service. And Steve had all these flowers. Remember, my husband was getting all these free flowers. So we gathered the participants and we went to the lake's edge because we had those lakes there. And we would throw our flowers in the lake. After the first 2 years, we changed it to the maypole and we progressed to the maypole and we did it there. When we got to Devore, we decided we wanted to put up in Friends of Faire a wall. In fact, let me go back a little bit. Before that, the last year or two at Devore, Ricky Kibble, they wanted to put in rose gardens because at that point we didn't know we were leaving there. And they said people that will donate for the rose garden will make a plaque for them for a loved one or whatever, a plaque. And they're a big square plaque. They're as heavy as all get out. I have a few of them still left. I'm finding their owners. But anyway, and the very first honoree was Sophie Mooney's daughter. She died of cancer at a very early age, Sophie Johnson. And so she was the first rose garden. And so we brought those plaques when we left Devore. There were 5 of them. There were actually 6, and one of them had belonged to an electrician who had died. It was an electrician for REP and had died on site of a heart attack, and they wanted the plaque, so they got the plaque. So I had the other 5. So we brought them, and we said, we'll put these up on one of our buildings. We had chipboard containers that we made to look like houses. So we made a memorial wall. A few people gave us some things, some people who had deceased, their clothing, and we made boxes for those. But I went to Kevin, and Kevin designed this pewter ribbon, and the person's name would be on it. And there's like a medallion kind of thing that says, it gives you something about it. And we would put the year they were born, the year they died. So they're all uniform. So we ended up with about 240 of these. And we would hold a huge service every year, very elaborate with the Queen and flowers and petals and everything. Well, REP, about 7 years ago now, I think, said we no longer want the wall. We really don't want it. That we feel it's uncomfortable to patrons who really didn't see the wall because it was always in the garden. but we no longer can do that. And so I started making up picture notices, and we still did it up until COVID hit. We would hold a service. So now I'm finding the last 2 years I've been working on Mark Raditz, who's one of my pimpettes, and I have been finding the people that the loved ones that these belong to, or their closest friend, or so that's what the memorial wall plaques are. And just this week, sent one off. I had one on there that said Mickey Gunn. I didn't know who Mickey Gunn was. I knew a lot of them that were. A person could be on the wall who is either a participant, a vendor, an REP employee, or FOF member. That was how you could get on the wall if somebody would buy a plaque in honor of you. And Kevin always made the plaques. All the plaques were made by Kevin, except those 5 big ones. But anyway, Mickey Gunn, somebody says, "Oh, that's so and so's grandfather," and she said he was the director of Friends of Faire. Well, I knew of most of the directors of Friends. In fact, I know them all except for back the ones that whoever was ran it in the 70s. So it turns out I knew him under a different name. She never even knew he had a plaque. And I just mailed it off this morning to her grandfather's plaque, and she's so excited to get it. And Kevin still will make them for people who want them their own personal at home or in their gardens or whatever. But those are what memorial wall plaques are there. And as I said, we had things, some people's costumes, their clothing. Others, we had one member who had no family, Romuald. I met Romuald. My first volunteer after meet and greet was at the media tent, and this man came up. Now we're at Devore, and there was the train tracks down below. This man came and he had a rope tying his pants up. He had no socks on, shoes. He had this plastic bread bag, a little bit of food in the bottom of it. And I thought, oh my goodness. And he came to the media booth, and I said, "Sir, may I help you?" He says, "Yes, I'm here for the media." And I thought, okay. He says, I'm a reporter with Mensa. Okay. And he brought out his credentials. So we signed him in, and I felt, poor man, he has nothing. And I invited him to come to Friends of Faire because we always had potluck at Friends of Faire. And I thought, well, at least I'm going to make sure this man eats. Well, his name was Rimald Cyborg Machaki was his last name. Cyborg Machaki. Anyway, he joined Friends of Faire. A very unusual man. He had 5 doctorates and things like mathematics. And one time he decided to try and teach us a class about trying to figure out longitude and latitude and where things were. And he gave us this wheel, and we were supposed to, oh, I think we all lasted 20 minutes. He was so far beyond us. He was in his 80s. He was still teaching college classes at Mount San Antonio. Anyway, he joined court finally. He was the scholar. We loved him. Oh my goodness, did we love that man. And he would always come to Friends of Faire, and he had a sweet tooth, and he would bring this huge apple pie he would get from Costco. That was always his contribution to potluck. And when we moved to Devore, he was so excited. He happened to own property across the street from Devore. I mean, from Irwindale, from the Irwindale Fair when we moved to Irwindale. It was, and he'd tell you, "I don't have a house." And I'd say, "Ramal, you do?" He said, "No, he owned commercial property and had a business office there, and he lived in that office." And in fact, when he would get ill, first they said, "Linda, Ramal needs to go to the hospital or whatever," and I would go with him. In fact, one time I was halfway home, and they called me and said, "Ramal took ill and he needs to go to the hospital," because he would get to the hospital. When Ramal was in his fair costume, Ramal was truly in the Renaissance, and he loved grape juice. The doctors say, "Have you had anything to drink?" "Yes, indeed, my lord. Fine champagne." And it would be this grape juice. And so they'd tell me, he's been drinking. No, he hasn't. But I said, "No, you have to understand." And he would not ever talk to them in normal language. So they would have me there to explain to them exactly who he was. He was okay. And we adored him. And in court, he was just amazing. And when he died, the Irwindale Police Department called me to say, "Would you please come to his property? Because we have no relatives." So my husband and I went, and they said, "Now you can't touch it. You can't take anything." Well, I found his Fair ID, and I took his Fair ID because it said it belonged to REP, and I wanted it to go on the wall. Well, Ramald had no family. We could find no family for him at all. So as Fair, we got together and we raised the money to have him cremated. We paid for it ourselves. I picked up the ashes, and he was on the memorial wall for many, many years. And now he's with one of my members. He has a place in her home on her wall. And but he was ours. We were his family. Eventually, they found some family showed up somewhere along the line who claimed the property about 2 years later. but he belonged to us. That was what our wall was like. That was our wall. That was our family.
I had another question for you.
Ask away.
You seem to be a organized managerial type.
Yes.
Have you ever used experiences gained at Faire in a non-Faire environment?
That's a good thought. Yes, we owned a business in San Bernardino, our last business, 40 years, and I became the president of the business association. And in fact, we were on Baseline, and Baseline, I don't know if you know much about San Bernardino, but San Bernardino is an interesting city. There are five most dangerous cities in California, and San Bernardino is listed as number 2 or 3. So anyway, we had the Baseline Business Association, BABA, and we had the girls of the evening. In fact, many of them were my customers because I sold costume pieces, and I had some really interesting customers too. So we wanted a mascot. So what did I do? I created a pimp. I did, and I took my ideas from Fair Effect as far as hats and with feathers, and people
What,
people who
what,
who know me know I did Fair. I was never quiet about it, and we used it a lot in our business, especially when people would come in going, "I'm going to the Renaissance Fair. What can I wear?" Or "I'm going to be working the Renaissance Fair. What do I need?" Well, I knew what they needed because I have been through costume approval enough times. No, that is not going to work. No, you cannot wear that. And so, yes, in my business, I used it a lot.
can I just ask, what did the ladies of the night think of the logo?
I don't know that they knew the logo, but my husband would sometimes our alarm system would go off because we had alarm, and he would go down there and they would see him and they would run up to his car. And so my husband, Linda, you got to go with me at night. My husband, for as outgoing as he was, my husband is a funny thing. One lady said to me one day at Fair, she said, last year, she said, your husband was a flirt. What they didn't know is my husband, if a lady got a little close to him, he'd go, "Have you met my wife? Linda, come here. I want you to meet so and so." He was very shy in that way. He wanted to make sure there was never, ever any. My husband had been a minister. In fact, when I first met him, I met him at church. He come to visit our church, I think, when I was about 9 years old. I didn't remember him then, but he came back as our youth pastor, and I was the youth secretary, and they said I had to be his secretary, and I did not like that man. Hey, he was not going to tell me what to do, and ended up marrying him. When I married him, he had 36 white shirts. That's when men still wore dress shirts. And he thought I was going to be washing, starching, and ironing all those 36 white shirts. Well, he found out 3 years later I wasn't, when they never got done. Said that was when Sears developed wash and wear shirts. And I remember the first time we bought one. Pitch for these shirts where you could wear it in the shower, wash it down with your bar of soap, rinse it off while you're in the shower, hang it up, and the next morning you can wear it. He bought one, and that was it. Those white shirts finally got donated. Anyway, so my husband and I knew each other extremely well. As I said, we worked together all the time. We were a good team. We really, truly were. And in fact, I have his ashes right here next to me in my chair. Life goes on.
I'm sort of running out of questions. When you were kind enough to say, yes, I'll do an interview, is there a story or person that you have not mentioned yet that you want to
Oh
put
my
in there?
goodness. I have to tell you about my pimpettes.
Okay.
As I said, we had different ways you could volunteer, and one of them was that you volunteered as a pimpette. You worked with me with membership. Most Friends of Faire members, if we volunteered, they volunteered 2 or 3 hours a day to earn their pass. That's all they had to do it. Not if you were a pimpette. You got to be chosen to be a pimpette. First of all, we had numbers. I was number 1. Everybody knew their number, and there are now finally 15 numbers, but there were, for the longest time, there were only 10. And if you were a pimpette, we always said you were a pimpette for life. The only way you got out of being a pimpette is you died. And you were at the table. We did all the memberships, came pre-fair. We signed up people. And my pimpettes and are still amazing. They still look out for me. Linda, is everything okay? And my construction crew. The other is the construction crew. We built buildings that are amazing. And originally at Fair, they had the Kissing Bridge. Do you remember the Kissing Bridge?
Yes, I do.
Okay, it had to be torn down because they got lizards on the bridge. It got to a point where men would be on the bridge and they would grab women and were very inappropriate. Under Phyllis, the kissing bridge was taken down. So Friends of Faire, we decided we wanted to rebuild the kissing bridge. But of course, we knew we couldn't put it in Faire. So my construction crew built this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful bridge. In fact, we used it throughout from the time it was built. We built it when we got to Irwindale. Queen would come up there when she's on progress, and we had bells and we rang and we shouted to the Queen, and we did everything. And people would come up. We'd get little groups would come up and sing on the bridge. But now the bridge is available. I'm hoping I'm going to get the fair to let me, because I'm my construction crew. Linda, you tell us, we'll be there and we'll put that bridge back together again because we have all the parts. They still have them.
I'm
I want.
sorry, I glitched while you were
Okay.
talking. Where is the modern kissing bridge, or where did they build it?
We built it in the Pfaff Garden inside our fence so the public could not. We called it the Kissing Bridge. It was built in honor of the Kissing Bridge, but it was not used for. We did some hand fastings on it occasionally, but it had to be things that we could control within. The public could not get to that bridge, and we would always greet the Queen. We knew the Queen was coming. Lord Sutherland would go off to give her flowers, and then when they came back, we knew the Queen's progress was coming. So we still have the bridge, and it's beautiful. It's a lot of my construction crew were either people of construction or set designers and builders, and they know how to build sets. So I'm hoping that we will get to put that bridge up somewhere in Faire, fix it so that the public cannot get up on it, but that it can be used for one or two singers or Faire participants can use it for something, but it needs to be out in Faire. It's beautiful, and it's a hold up back from the original Faire. Anybody that has done Faire from a girl on knows about the Kissing Bridge.
I know this is a delicate subject. Since you've been with the fair a long time, how have you rolled with the changes that have occurred there?
Sometimes, but we have to understand that times have changed, and we had to change with them. Faire has had to change with them, and I know that's upsetting to people, especially older Faire people, but we have. That's why our Faire survives, because we have to change with the times, and it's not always a happy thought. It doesn't always make people, really happy. It's like the cost of Faire. The cost of Faire has gone up tremendously, but so has their costs. You and I couldn't afford to own a Faire. I'm always thankful we have people that actually own our Faire that can still keep it open. Phyllis couldn't, and that's the sadness. Because I always get, well, Phyllis's time was a totally different time for all of us.
What do you see as the legacy of all of this?
We create positivity. We create a time period, and we're very, very careful to make sure that we are as accurate as we possibly can be, because that's our history. And when all these other fair, all fairs started from Phyllis. This whole industry is because of Phyllis.
I would like to think Phyllis could come back and say, oh yeah, some things are
I
different.
recognize a lot of it.
Yeah. I don't recognize the ladies wearing bodices of chainmail.
I know.
And I don't recognize the gentleman wearing a bathroom rug between his legs. But, it's basically kind of the same thing.
Well, I have to tell you, when I first got to DeVore, I was, to this day, I still remember there were a couple girls would wear lettuce leaves, and they would watch them melt. These lettuce leaves wilt throughout the day. I thought that was very odd. To me, that was amazing. And then there was always the one who wore the chainmail, and you would say, "Oh, that sunburn must be something else."
That was my exact thought.
See? Yes.
And I'm going,
yes.
I'm not going to ask them what their tan line looks like.
But you knew. But
and also
then
how hot it could get. And that
I know
metal straight
burning,
on some rather tender flesh.
Yes. In fact, I have to tell you, we went to Arizona Fair one year, and their joust area had metal seats in Arizona. I thought, that's not real smart. But anyway, about costuming. Last year, we had two men, probably in their 20s, and they wore hay bales as with suspenders on.
I've seen that picture, yes.
That picture, yes, I love that picture. We all kept thinking, those things must itch. Oh my goodness, those things must itch. Because we all know hay bales. But they even had garlands around their head. And if you looked at garlands, you're going close, those garlands are little tiny hay bales. Those are my favorite. I think those, all the new costumes, I don't understand the Batman and Superman and Captain America and all this. It just doesn't begin to. And if I see one more Disneyland pirate, yes, we had pirates, but they weren't Disneyland pirates. But that's their idea of pirates, and they, you know what? They join in, and they just feel so welcomed, and they are so excited. And Pirate Weekend is probably one of the biggest weekends. Oh, and then there's Cottage Core. That one I still don't understand. Mushrooms on your head, and they carry dandelions, but they love that. This generation loves it. That's their idea of joining in the Renaissance Fair. So I had to say, Linda, they don't want to look exactly like we do, but they want to join in and have all the fun, and they love it. And I tell you, the crowds were so big this year at fair. So obviously it's still loved. And even with the cost, when you look at the cost of Disneyland and you say this, and this we interact, this you get to touch, you get to feel, you get to play with. We invite you to join in, come and join, uh, sit down and enjoy, sing along with people. It's amazing. I just, it's fair is so alive. It is so alive. And then yet somebody just said to me the last couple of weeks, you know, because of Phyllis, they even have now Coachella. She is ultimately responsible for things like Coachella. Now, isn't it? And I keep thinking about it. People do go out there and they get involved. They wear costumes out there. So maybe that's in its own way. Is that not an interesting thought?
I think that's a good spot for us
Thank you.
to stop recording. And that's my June 2024 interview with Linda Sutherland. My name is Dan McLaughlin, and this has been another episode of Fair Folk at Work. If you'd like me to pass along a message to Linda, you can email me at djng@earthlink.net. Questions or comments about the podcast itself can also be directed to me at djng@earthlink.net. Finally, if you or somebody you know would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, email me at djng@earthlink.net. But that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.